I kind of jumped into art pretty young. When I was in high school, I decided to go to an art high school. I didn't really know why, but it just seemed like the right thing to do. At that time, I took a class in experimental art practices. So as a 16-year-old, I went to Chicago and learned about performance art, interactive works, like early fluxists, like avant-garde sort of practices, which totally shaped the way that I think I saw the world and led me on the trajectory to continue making art after that. So I went straight into an undergraduate program in Kansas City Art Institute, and I studied fiber there. It's where I learned to weave. Decided I loved it and I needed to do it forever. And then after that, I went to grad school in San Francisco at California College of the Arts, and I did an interdisciplinary studio degree there. So that kind of is how this all got mixed up, just from a practice of weaving and textile-based things to being yes, I can collect rocks and make drawings and do video performances and make it all tie together. I do a lot of sketching and drawing, and I keep my collections of things that end up influencing bigger projects and bigger pieces. This is sort of my thinking space right here. Then here on this sort of area of my desk, we have some of these replicas that I've been making that are based on desert rose selenite crystals, casting them out of plastic to kind of think about what it is to take something that's natural, exists in a totally different state, and then turn it into plastic so it can exist in a totally different time span. Other things I have on my desk are these cool industrial glass chunks I've been collecting for quite a while. I use them in different sculptures from time to time. They kind of function as weights. I started collecting them because they looked like icebergs. I was doing projects based on icebergs at the time. So the first one of these I bought at an antique store, and it said it was volcanic glass. And I was like, oh, sweet, cool, I have volcanic glass now. And totally thought this whole long history for this piece of glass. It came straight from a volcano. It was rare, but it was somehow only $5 at an antique store. And then I had a friend who was a glass person who was like, no, that's slag glass. That is waste from different glass kilns. Then I found you can get all of this industrial waste glass. So I started collecting it, and I like that kind of disconnect between thinking, here's this glass that's coming straight from a volcano that's found out in the field, as opposed to something that's pulled from a factory floor at the bottom of the kiln. I work on a number of different projects all at one time. Usually I have 2 or 3 big projects going, but they all kind of come back to the idea of landscape, and not necessarily thinking about landscape as this pretty thing in the distance, but thinking about what the idea of landscape is and how humans sort of integrate with our surroundings. So I'm kind of always working on these different projects that are trying to bring together a human body with a rock, with a weaving, with something else. They kind of propose new ways of thinking about the way in which we inhabit our space. These on the wall behind me are kind of in process. They haven't really found their final form yet. I really like the idea of making this hand-woven, hand-dyed thing that is made in the fashion of a rug and then allowing it to be a rug. I think there's something that it becomes precious about this handmade thing where we don't want to then use it for the thing it's supposed to be used as. So they're on the wall right now, but I feel if I show them in the right context, I'll probably try and figure out a way to have them on the ground and have people interact with objects to kind of mess with the idea of preciousness. When people look at my work and interact with my work, I really hope that they come away with a lot of questions. I'm really interested in beautiful objects, for one. So if nothing else, I hope that people can see some of these things and be that's a beautiful object, that's a beautiful textile, at the base level. But if they have the time and the interest in going further, asking questions of why is there this shiny plastic rock? What does that mean? And what is a shiny plastic rock talking about in relationship to a thing that's actually a rug, but a rug that looks like something else? And it seems there may be more information coded in there. But I don't quite know what that is. Maybe if I read this title or read this statement, I'll go and do a little bit more research and think about what the nuclear testing outside White Sands, New Mexico means, or what does it mean to think about early modernist choreography, or all these random things that I kind of research and put into the work. And it's there if you want to access it, but it's definitely not necessary. So mainly I'm trying to provide a bunch of different access points for people to ask questions of what's around them and how they can relate to it. So we've kind of talked about this work, so this space back here is where I do a lot of my working and thinking. Let me show you the rest of the space, and we'll head up to where I do the actual weaving. So I share this space with two other artists. We've been here for about 4 years. It's in an office park, it's kind of unique, but it allows us the fluidity to have different sorts of kind of spaces. So up here, we have where I do all of the actual weaving and creation of textiles. We don't think about fabric quite as much as we maybe should. Fabric is something, you know, that we like are clothed in every day. It's a sort of like invisible protection device that we're surrounded by, but there are three main ways of constructing cloth that we're kind of aware of and that we engage with on a daily basis. So a loom is used to weave fabric. So weaving fabric is the interaction of perpendicular threads with one another, the warp and the weft, as I just mentioned. The other way that we kind of see a lot is knitting. So knitting is like what your t-shirt's made out of. It's something with its stretch, but knitting is made by a continuous thread looping together. So that's kind of like the fundamental difference between the two. And I think the term loom, it's usually associated with the idea of weaving, but we can think of it in a broader sense of a sort of like large mechanism that's aiding in textile production. So the loom I have here, it's like a standard floor loom, the way things are woven, except for mine's computer aided. So I have this little laptop hooked up over here. I've had this loom for like the last 15 years. I love it, we're best friends. So when you're kind of figuring out the pattern for a loom, you're really restricted to an XY grid axis. So it's a really simple like horizontal grid and vertical grid that are working together to make this patterns, because we have horizontal fibers, so like these guys we have here, they're called the weft, and we have vertical yarns that are the ones that are on the loom, and they're called the warp. On the loom we have these sort of hanging frames. They're called harnesses. That is one way the pattern is made. The more harnesses you have, the more of these frame things you have, the more complex the pattern you can get. Kind of the basic looms like the ones I teach on, they'll just have 4 harnesses. So this has 16. And that information is in the computer here, where I have part of the pattern programmed into it, but I have to do a lot of the actual weaving. But it's exactly the same as if somebody were to like hand make a draft for a weaving. In the days before, it had a computer aid to it. And on a traditional loom, there would be a number of treadles, like pedals, that correlate to the harnesses. But that's what my computer does, is it removes the need for treadles and pedals. And then there is another point of access, which is the order in which these are lifting, and that's also programmed into the computer. So with this loom right here, I just step on one pedal, and it will raise the harnesses in a certain pattern. So right now on here is one of the pieces that is woven in the style of, it's riffing off of a traditional rug technique, and it can technically be used as a rug. There are different ways to weave. One of the basic ways is you can just kind of throw one of these shuttles the whole way across, but with these sort of rug tapestries I've been working on, I'm trying to embed these larger shapes that have very specific color areas in them. So right now I'm using 5 shuttles at a time to create these different colorways. So I will take the shuttle, put it in, and take it out at a certain point where I want to stop that color. Take the next one, put them in. I'm sort of interlacing them as I go. And this tapestry technique I'm doing on the loom, I'm doing it on this like big, kind of fancy computer loom, but this is something anyone could do at home on a frame loom. So you can kind of take a frame of any sort, whether it's a window frame or a canvas frame. You can set up a series of threads on there that act as your warp. And then you find something as your weft, and you can go ahead and make kind of your own tapestry at home pretty easily. There's quite a few good tutorials online. So I used to production weave. I was straight out of undergrad, making like just yardage and yardage for an artist in Kansas City. So that's what these boxes are. You can set them up, and there's a thing that goes up here, and you pull them, and you can weave a yard in an hour. It's kind of the opposite of what I'm doing right now. This is like the slowest way you could possibly weave. Weaving is pretty much at the core of my practice. It's a thing I always go back to. It's a thing that like gave me a sort of like material grounding to the more conceptual aspect of my work. So I can be sitting in the studio trying to figure out how humans exist in the world, having these large existential questions and conversations with myself, but there's something that's a nice complement to sitting down with a material practice and weaving and working with things and being allowed to think while making and thinking with your hands. I think that's a really pretty vital part of my practice. Like I always have this and I always have this to go back to. It's been like a kind of funny limiting point in different portions of my life where I realized at a young age, like I would never move to New York because I would have to bring my loom and there's just not space or money to have a studio in like a small space. Looms are pretty interesting. You can buy them new or you can buy them secondhand. And there's kind of like these intricate networks of people. I got mine for $3,000 because a woman had passed away in Ohio, so I rented a minivan and drove there to pick it up. There's like a whole kind of sub-community of weavers and people who engage in textile practices that's really kind of fun to be a part of in that way. And it's really charitable. People have looms, they use them for a while, and then they're usually like, would rather give them away to somebody that's going to use it and enjoy it and make a practice of it and continue making it and weaving and teaching more people about it than to try and sell it. So it becomes about like passing on the like practice and tradition than the monetary value. So the easiest place to see my work is on my website, and it's elhanson.com. That is always like consistently there. I was in the Object Inspiration show at the Vision Gallery, which is an interesting show that was curated where Peter Bugg pulled a bunch of objects from the historical collection and then asked local artists to respond to them. So there's a kind of fun prompt that I think there's going to be a future iteration of possibly as well. I do a lot more work when it comes to organizing it, like jurying the quilt show for the city of Chandler, also running some public programming for Canal Convergence Institute through Scottsdale Public Art. So yeah, if you're in the city and looking to find me, I'll probably be organizing something as opposed to showing my own work. Having galleries and art in public spaces, I think is crazy important. So you can be going and doing something with like a very clear, like, I'm going to pay my water bill, or I'm going to do this like very practical utilitarian thing that needs to happen, but to have like these nice little divergences to allow like moments to think about things in a slightly different way, or to see something you haven't seen before, or to like disrupt in a really positive way. It's a huge benefit, and I think the more and more we kind of invest in these public art projects and programming, the better, more broader, more integrated art practice will be, and people will, be allowed to think about things in a slightly different way. For anyone who has any slight interest in art, the best thing is to just start working and start doing. Like, there's so many ways that you can engage creatively right now. I would highly recommend just doing any of them. I'm working in like a million different media where it's like if you have the impulse to do something, just do it. Like, go to the store, buy a set of paints, sit down and see what happens. Also, I think the crazy important thing to remember with like jumping into any new like art or creative endeavor is there is no way to fail because there is no right answer. So that's kind of the best thing. And I think that's the number one thing that holds people back a bit is they're like, I don't know if I can do that because I don't know if I'm going to do it right. But there is no right answer. So the best thing is to just like follow the impulses and instincts. And the internet is kind of amazing when it comes to figuring out tutorials as to how to do things. There are a number of things that I've learned how to do where it's like, oh, like with these specifically, like I had never cast anything in plastic before, so go to Google, how do I make resin casts of rocks? Amazing tutorials right there. So it's like really, we are at this amazing point where like we can access all this information, so it just takes the lack of fear of just doing it. Sitting down, taking an hour a week to do something that is creative, it's huge.